welcome to the Religion and Popular Culture podcast, where we talk about religion, popular culture, and everything in between. I'm your anthropologist of religion, Vivian Asimos, and as always, I am joined with the sociologist with the most theologist, Aled Thomas. Aled, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you, Vivian. I've been thinking about if I'm the sociologist with the most theologist, maybe you could be an anthropomologist?
Oh,
it's a
okay.
It's a little bit laboured, but
I mean, isn't it always?
Isn't sociologist?
Isn't that just our podcast?
Yes. Yeah, that's review number 1. It's a little bit laboured. But no, I'm well, thank you. And how are you?
I am feeling a little bit spooky.
Ooh.
I'm feeling a little spooky. No, I'm really excited because it's autumn finally. It took a while for it to get here.
I'm glad you're excited. I am not. It's cold and I'm miserable.
Oh, I love it. It's the right kind of cold, though, where it's like crisp and you just need like a jacket, but you don't need like a parka yet.
Yeah, but I like to walk around in a t-shirt, as you know.
Oh,
but
I like scarves and a jacket.
I like late spring, when you're on the cusp of summer, so you can walk around in your t-shirt, but you're also not dying because climate change.
Oh, see, I'm excited for it being
well, I'm glad you are. I'm happy that you're happy.
This episode will be coming out in the beginning of October, which is my second favorite month, because it is the second best autumn month. November is the best month of the year, because to me it's like peak autumn. You get the most range of tree changes happening all at once in November.
This has clearly been thought about.
Yes. I mean, what else do I do with my life?
Yeah.
I'm either overthinking religion and popular culture or I'm overthinking months in autumn.
I do quite like November because, and you may hate me for saying this, my excitement about Christmas starts to set in.
See, I don't get excited about Christmas until about a week before.
Oh, I'm a Christmas guy. I once, when I was doing my PhD, I went to a seminar at the OU, and I was wearing a Christmas jumper, and it was my Christmas jumper that has gingerbread people on it with Santa hats.
Was this in May?
No, it wasn't in May, but I was still told it was too early. It was, I want to say, December 7th.
That's not too early. That's not even too early for me.
I think it's fine to do it from December 1st. If you're going to spend money on a Christmas jumper, you want to get mileage out of that thing. So
because December 5th is St. Nicholas Day, I think
you're right.
So yeah, I think from that point on, you can be Christmas.
Yeah, and why not? So I came into this seminar wearing this jumper, and eyebrows were raised. And a friend of the podcast, who has recently appeared on the podcast, asked me why the hell I was wearing it. Because it was too early.
That sounds like him.
But nothing would dampen my festive cheer.
Well, we're not talking about Christmas today.
No, we're not talking about Christmas today. No, let's bring it back to Spooktober.
We're talking back to Spooktober. So we got 2 episodes coming out in Spooktober. And the first one is bringing it back to, I think, at least for me, an original spook. It was the kind of beginning of vampire love in pop culture. Okay. To the extent I think that it is. I mean, obviously vampires have been around in pop culture for ages.
I was going to ask you when you discovered this thing that we're discussing today that for some reason I'm keeping a secret as if people haven't seen it.
Yeah, I mean, they've seen the episode title, I'm assuming. When you've hit play, you saw this. We're talking about Buffy today, and we've had an episode on Buffy before where we talked about it more generally in relation to the way it deals with monsters. But today we're going to talk about a very specific episode. And this is season 6, episode 7, Once More with Feeling, which I would probably think of as probably the most famous Buffy episode.
Yes, as a single episode. There are storylines that I think people maybe remember more, but in terms of a singular episode, it's got to be this one. It's so talked about.
I think my other favorite Buffy episode is Hush.
Hush is a fantastic episode.
Is a fantastic episode.
That's top 5 Buffy material right there.
And maybe we'll talk about Hush later, but I just did a video essay on it, and I didn't want to double up too much. I double up a lot between
Links in the description.
I mean, yeah, sure. But yeah, so I tend to double up a lot on stuff, but I was trying not to do it too much. We'll just do 2 different Buffys. But anyway, Once More with Feeling originally aired November, so we're not too far off from spook season.
No.
But November of 2001, so it's been a while.
Oh.
It makes me feel old. And this is the musical episode. So the whole episode is a musical, and the way that they kind of get around it is the idea is that there's a demon that comes to Sunnydale, who makes everyone spontaneously burst into song and dance and reveal their hidden truths.
Yeah.
This demon remains unnamed throughout the episode, but I think in the credits it's Sweet is the name that they've given it.
Oh, okay. I've not looked at the credits.
But I am not referring to the demon by Sweet in my notes. To be fair, I don't mention the demon very much in my notes.
I think the demon is pretty inconsequential.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of there to explain why people are singing and dancing.
Yeah.
Pretty much. The title, Once More with Feeling, comes from one of the songs that the demon sings, kind of near the end, when everyone has revealed their truths and therefore are a bit feeling funky with each other, and says, quote, "Say you're happy now once more with feeling," which I think is also a great line.
Yes. And,
so, I think before we get into any kind of analyses of the episode, should we first talk about our experiences with Buffy, and specifically with Once More with Feeling?
Sure. Well, I was going to ask you when you watched Buffy, because you're a little bit younger than I am, and Buffy is actually a little bit before our time.
Yeah, I mean, so
in terms of the target demographic.
I grew up watching Angel.
Right, okay.
And I was a very late comer to Buffy. I only started watching Buffy once I was dating my now husband. Because he found out that I grew up watching Angel, had seen a lot of Angel, loved Angel, had never seen an episode of Buffy.
Right.
And he grew up watching Buffy, loved Buffy, obsessed with Buffy, never seen an episode of Angel. So we decided that we were going to watch all of Buffy and then all of Angel. So that way we were both caught up on each other's interests of the Buffy universe.
Sure.
So I was a bit of a latecomer to Buffy specifically, but not the Buffyverse because of Angel. So I had seen episodes where Buffy had shown up in Angel. They had talked a lot about Buffy. They had talked a lot about the characters and the storylines that come up in Buffy. So it wasn't completely new to me. Seeing the fashions was renewed memory of the fashions of the time. Wasn't too much of a shocker, which it is when you go back to rewatch it again nowadays, where you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
But what about you?
I only watched Buffy for the first time 5 years ago. Toria showed it to me after insisting for years that she wanted me to watch it, and we just never got around to it because she was obsessed with Buffy when she was a teenager. Obsessed with all things Buffy. Massive poster of Spike on her bedroom wall,
Of course.
all the...
I figured that's the one Toria would have, of course.
Spike, not Angel. Angel was too broody, whereas Spike was a little bit of a bad boy, but, and I'm going to quote her here, he'll still take care of you. She's clearly thought about this. I'm sorry if you're listening, Tora. So we finally got round to watching it. I don't know why I didn't watch it when I was younger. I think partly because it was being shown on Channel 4 in the UK, I want to say, and because it was pre-age of streaming and things like that, it was hard to know where you were in the narrative, and if you'd missed several seasons and things like that. So I just never got around to it. So we sat down and we watched them start to finish. And so, I with all those dated aspects and things like that, I was seeing it for the first time in like 2017 with no nostalgia attached or anything like that. And I absolutely loved it.
I was about to say, it's still a pretty good show.
I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Really great, holds up really well. I don't care about fashion holding up well. It's a period piece.
It's just fun.
Let's think of it like that. But the stories are still compelling. Particularly from like the third season onwards, when it stopped being Monster of the Week and more. They still did Monster of the Week, sure, but there was more of an emphasis on a journey that the characters were going on, and a big bad and a big threat and things, which I found a little bit more interesting than when they were just doing Monster of the Week at the beginning. I don't think it's a secret to anyone that I absolutely love Giles and would like to emulate him in every way. Anthony Stewart Head is, of course, a treasure. But yeah, I loved it, and the musical episode I enjoyed so much we watched it twice in a row. Rather than moving on to the next episode, we just put it on again. So that's my experience.
Yeah. So have you seen any of Angel? I know we're not talking about Angel today, but I'm just curious.
The only bit I've seen of Angel is that there's an episode where they do like a Muppets kind of thing.
I was about to say the kind of equivalent musical episode for Angel is the Muppets episode.
Yeah.
Which is still so much fun and amazing.
It does look fun. And they kind of look like Avenue Q.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Maybe we'll do that episode sometime in the future.
Yeah, well, Toria has never seen Angel either, despite being hugely into Buffy. And they are streaming now, aren't they? Either on Prime or Disney Plus, but
I think they're on Disney Plus now.
So we'll get around to it eventually when we work through the backlog of things that we've agreed to watch. But
highly suggest. Love me some Angel. It's very different than Buffy.
I've only heard good things.
But it as long as you're not going in expecting Buffy, it's quite good and it's fun. But we're not talking about Angel today. We're talking about Buffy.
Yes.
I think the musical episode was interesting. It kind of spawned the idea of musical episodes in TV shows that I don't think is as much of a thing anymore. But it definitely was in like the early 2000s.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I think Scrubs is the one that I think of the most as having a musical episode.
That was extremely popular.
That one was really good.
Because it was written by... I can't remember the name of the guys, but they're the two guys who wrote Avenue Q.
Oh, right.
So, it had a good Broadway team behind it. Community did a musical episode, which isn't all that memorable, despite the fact I love Community. I was a little bit... Because I was going in looking for something of Scrubs standard.
Yeah.
As problematic as Scrubs is looking back on it, but the musical episodes were fun. The musical episode, I beg your pardon, was fun. I'm trying to think of another show that's definitely...
It was definitely a thing for a while for shows like Buffy that were kind of long-running, like Buffy and Scrubs, where they were like long-running serialized shows in the early 2000s. There would be a musical episode.
I think it was particularly bold for Buffy as well, because Scrubs could do it without anybody batting an eye because it was a sitcom.
It's Scrubs. It's weird.
Yeah. But for Buffy, it had this element of, yeah, sure, it's fantasy or whatever, but it still had that grit. That realism, that seriousness, and because I remember when the musical episode out, there was a lot of talk about it, saying, really, isn't this just a massive joke, and things like that. So something I quite enjoyed, I know this is getting ahead of the conversation a little bit, but something I really enjoyed when I watched the musical episode is that it was actually an integral part of the story of that season. I thought it was going to be a side episode that was completely irrelevant to the ongoing narrative. It would just be, the musical episode, wasn't that fun, and then it's back to the main story. But actually key things happen in the Buffy narrative in the musical episode, and I really like it for that.
Yeah, and they point out in the episode the absurdity of it on multiple occasions. And there are bits where you hear other people in the town. You hear little snippets of their songs, which is really fun as a way of like pointing out just how weird and crazy this is happening. There's a ballad that you overhear for a little bit of a woman begging a police officer to not give her a ticket because the hydrant wasn't there when she parked and stuff like that.
They got the mustard
Yeah.
out.
The very first time was they asked, is it a spell? Should we be thinking about a spell that has only affected us, or is it the whole town? And Buffy opens up the door and there's a whole song and dance number going on of someone singing about how the dry cleaners got a mustard stain out of a shirt, and then she just closes the door on it and goes, "No, it's not just us."
Yeah, I think... should we talk about the songs for a moment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the songs are actually pretty good. I listen to the soundtrack, not like every day, but I put the soundtrack on and I know most of the words, and they're catchy songs. Which I think is also key to it being a really popular episode, because as I mentioned with the Community musical episode, I can't remember any of the songs. It all just kind of fell flat.
Yeah.
So some of the success of the episodes lies with those songs, and as you said, a lot of it is done with a wink and a smile towards the camera. That that they're not taking themselves too seriously. One of my favorite lines is Willow singing. I think this line's mostly filler.
Yeah.
And bless Alison Hannigan, she cannot sing.
No, and she actually, I read that both her and the person who plays Dawn basically said, please do not have me sing. So when Dawn gets captured by the demon at one point, and instead of having a song number, she actually does a ballet number because she's a trained ballet dancer, which I thought was a really nice touch, that it wasn't just singing, it was also dancing as well. But Allison doesn't sing at all, really. No, she has like just 2 lines, maybe.
Those 2 lines. Well, the first time when she sang in I've Got a Theory, I thought, oh no! Yeah. She's just off-key completely.
Because everyone is using their own voice, which I think helps to add to the vibe of if you were just suddenly breaking into song, not everyone's voice would be beautiful to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people wouldn't hit the notes right. That being said, there are 2 actors, I think, that have stellar voices and really just carried the whole show, the whole episode, and that's Anthony Stewart Head, the love of your life, and Amber Benson, who plays Tara.
I think
both have some really good voices.
I think that's why they gave Tara the big ballad.
Yeah.
That she sings entirely on her own. I think she's the only one who has a song that only her sing. That only she sings, I beg your pardon.
I thought Buffy, because Buffy's opening number, but I guess she's got backup song, like singers in it, and like the vampires say little quips and stuff, but it is mostly Buffy.
Yeah. And Anthony Stewart Head played Frankenfurter in the early 90s. Google it. There's some fabulous pictures. I would have killed to have seen him play Frankenfurter, and there's a video of him on YouTube singing it as well, and he's really good. So he's got a great voice. Yeah,
there's like a kind of a point right before the big showdown where Anthony Stewart Head and Amber Benson are singing a duet together, and it was just one of those things where I was like, really? Like,
they've definitely put the 2 better singers together.
You've got to put the 2 better singers together for it, because otherwise... And I do think that Anthony Stewart Head also sang a song all by himself. Now that I am thinking about it. He sings a song about his kind of inner truth song is that he's realizing that he's been kind of sheltering Buffy a lot. Yeah. And is worried that it's kind of keeping her from growing up. Because, maybe we should talk a little bit about the main storylines of the show. And that there's, as I said, like, they're kind of revealing a lot of hidden truths, and so it's all kind of tied to those larger narratives that that Alad was talking about. And one of the big ones is that Buffy died at the end of the previous season. And so then at the beginning of this one, the Scooby Gang, primarily led by Willow, decided to cast a spell to bring her back to life. Because they believed that she was in some kind of hell dimension. But actually, Buffy reveals in a previous episode to Spike that she was actually in heaven.
Or and what she understands as heaven.
Yeah, which is really fascinating. And this was... There's a lot of Buffy that is very reliant on a Christian understanding of world building, for lack of a better word. That's not how they would view it, but an understanding of the way the world works and the way that the afterlife is structured and things like that. It is very Christo-focused in Buffy, which I guess makes sense with ideas of the vampires that are afraid of the cross, and you've got vampires and werewolves and those kind of more Western conceptions of supernatural. But what is interesting is her definition, for lack of a better word, of the heaven that she was in, which is simply that everything was peaceful.
Yeah, bliss.
Yeah, that there wasn't any pain. But it wasn't like big paradise of I was also super happy. It wasn't even like crazy happiness. It was just a lack of pain or suffering. So it was that kind of like level of contentment and peace rather than the overjoy, which I think is probably what a lot of people, particularly in the West, might think of as the kind of Christian idea of heaven.
Yeah.
Which I think is really fascinating. Did you have any thoughts on the heaven-hell scape?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how she, for a good while, particularly in the non-musical episode, when she reveals to Spike that, you know, she thought she'd been brought back into hell, that the real world, the world in which she lived in, the current life, that is hell. But I do find it interesting that scene, because I've shown it in class in the past, goes on for about 5-6 minutes, and it takes her a long while to come to the conclusion that it's heaven. She describes it in very abstract ways, and then I think the line is something like, "Oh, I guess it was like heaven." And then in the musical, she's basically describing it as heaven.
Yeah.
But until that point, she was just in a state of peace. I've always really liked the fact that she tells Spike and no one else, because Spike has died, and there's that kinship between the two of them. Yeah. And then, of course, when she reveals in song to the Scooby Gang, her friends, that this is how she felt, Spike is the one who comes in and saves her, essentially. And reassures her.
Yeah, he's got the really wonderful line of, you've just got to keep on living, because that's just what it is, it's living.
Yeah, life isn't bliss, life is just this.
It's living.
Yeah, and I also really like in that song, this is just purely a musical thing, but I like that when Buffy sings Heaven, she's off-key. Intentionally off-key. It kind of gives that song that downward spiral feel, because she goes down musically. To me, it feels like the song is starting to go out of control.
Yeah.
And as all those emotions come, especially for Willow, whose bright idea it was to bring her back. And for context as well, Giles really roasts Willow for bringing Buffy back, as delighted as he is to see her again.
Yeah.
And so he makes it pretty clear that she was being a very silly child.
Well, this is the season where the big bad is Willow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which was a really interesting twist to it.
It's the most angsty season.
Well, yeah.
Angst is dripping out of that show all the time, but season 6 in particular, my goodness, that is because is it also depressing? Isn't it also season 6 where there's the episode where you find out that maybe everything that's happening in Buffy is going on in her head?
I don't remember.
There's a really fantastic episode where she's slipping between two realities. The one where she's the Slayer, and another Slayer where she's in hospital being treated for delusions where she thinks she's a Slayer. Do you remember this episode?
I vaguely. I always hate these kinds of episodes, though.
What's wonderful about this episode is that it doesn't actually resolve anything. It leaves it open that actually this could all be going on inside Buffy's head, that she isn't the Slayer whatsoever. There isn't a, oh, now she's back. She just has to have faith, really, that this is her life. I think it's a great episode.
I always hate those episodes. They get me so stressed.
Oh, it's an incredibly stressful episode. I think it's in season 6, which is just our incredibly bleak season.
Yeah.
Because Willow does a lot of things.
So Buffy, basically since being brought back to life, as we've kind of hinted at, is depressed and is really struggling with depression. Although they never say it that way. They kind of word it in very different ways, probably because this was a time where mental health was not seen as a very good thing to be discussing. Yeah,
I think it would have been explored in much greater depth had that season been made today.
Oh yeah. Instead they kind of just hint that she just needs to kind of pull herself together. You know, those kinds of phrasings that you're used to hearing with depression.
Smile
of like,
more.
You should just be happy. You're alive. Just be happy. It's like, so that's kind of what's going on with Buffy. There's Anya and Xander, who Anya is a vengeance demon that is now a human that is now dating Xander, and they're actually...
Oh gosh, I'd completely forgotten about that angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're feeling a lot of anxiety about, you know, the idea of forever with another human.
Oh, it's the most heteronormative song.
They have a... Heard.
It's like, oh, the ball and chain. Oh, yeah. I hate my spouse. And it's like, well, just don't be together then.
They've got that very classic song. That one kind of draws on those kind of old school musical ones of, you know, the tap dancing and Gene Kelly, and it's that type of musical. That's kind of that's the way that the music sounds. It's the way that the singing sounds. They have got little jabs at each other, and then they're dancing on a table. Ooh. You know, it's. The big robes that they're wearing because it's happening in the morning, and they're wearing fuzzy slippers and stuff. It's very that vibe.
Yeah.
And then you've got Willow, back to our more angsty stuff, who has magically manipulated Tara into forgetting an argument that they had, so that way they can just go back to being happy. And it's kind of there's some obviously some issues, and Tara's big ballady song that Alad was talking about was a love song to Willow when she's still not aware that this stuff was going on, but it's called I'm Under Your Spell.
Yeah. And so the audience is one step ahead of Tara and thinks, that means two things.
Yeah, so we know the double meaning, and I think by the end of the episode, Tara has realized that she's playing with the memory, and then you have that thing that happens when shit like that happens in relationships, where you go, how much has this been happening? Is it just one time, or has this been going on for a long time? And, you know, it's the loss of trust thing that happens.
Yeah, very recently as well, Umbrella Academy has tapped into that question as well of magical, for want of a better term, manipulation. Where somebody becomes very unsure if their entire relationship with someone is based on a lie, if they've ever loved someone in the first place, because they've been controlled by the power of another person.
Yeah. And, you know, as much as we're talking about magic and stuff here, it does tie into, like I said, things like that happen in a relationship, even if it's not based off of some spell of a flower that you put under someone's pillow. It's still things that you deal with. And I think Tara makes a reference to that in her duet number with Giles near the end, as she says something about having experienced something like this before, which I don't think she means it in a magical sense. She means it in a distrust sense.
Yeah, that she's been coerced.
Yeah. And then you have Giles, who's been really struggling with the fact that Buffy is struggling, because Giles is her kind of surrogate father figure for people who haven't seen Buffy before.
Yeah.
And so he's really struggling with the fact that...
he's the librarian with the abnormally close relationship with these high school students.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, it was part of his job at the beginning, because he's a watcher.
He still spends a lot of time with it. I am Giles till I die. I love Giles, but I don't know if it's because I used to be a secondary school teacher, but especially when I watch those early seasons before they leave school, I'd just be like, why on earth are these 4 kids spending this much time with the librarian? Especially like somebody like Xander. Xander's not there to study, is he?
At least it is a parental relationship.
Oh, yeah.
In the early 2000s, they did not have many qualms with age issues.
No. I mean, even like 10 years later when you look at Glee, which is even worse for that.
Oh, yeah.
But
there was a whole thing with that with Pretty Little Liars as well. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but one of the storylines, because it's from a book, and the original storyline in the book is that this girl's dating her teacher, and then the teacher like gets arrested, as you would if you were dating a student, and then they like move on with the life and be like, yeah, that was a thing and that was bad and now we're moving on. But for some reason people were like standing the relationship when it was a TV show, so she ends up with the teacher at the end and he never goes to jail, and it's like, this is a problem.
yeah to be fair, there's nothing like that in Buffy.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's the TV shows at this time would have had no problems making that a thing in Buffy, and that's why it's good that it wasn't in Buffy.
Yeah, for sure.
No, Giles was definitely, he's a father figure, and he mentions multiple times. Yeah, he mentions multiple times throughout the series references to her being a daughter.
Yeah.
And she makes references to him being like a father to her.
He's also the Slayer's watcher. That person who is designated to watch over, quite literally, the Slayer and train them, hone their abilities, and to protect them. The Slayer, for people who are listening, is a girl who's born once in a generation to tackle the evils and the vampires. So I can't remember the opening monologue, but there's something, especially in the early seasons, there's a monologue from Giles where he describes that the Slayer is a teenage girl every generation who has these amazing super strength magical powers to take on the dark forces, and then there ends up being lots of various slayers along the way due to dying and resurrection and so forth.
Yeah, because Buffy dies a lot,
so then there's a lot of slayers popping up, a lot of collateral slayers.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, at the end, isn't there like thousands of slayers or something?
Yeah, that's the conclusion, is that they're often girls who are in traumatic positions, who are given the ability to basically stand up for themselves because they're being abused or assaulted or so forth. There's some really grim scenes of like some children being abused, and then all of a sudden they get their Slayer power and they're able to fight back.
So what was Buffy's story? I mean, obviously her dad's not around, but he didn't seem like an ass.
No, I think he turns up in like one episode.
Yeah.
Sorry, what do you mean by his story? Like in that season or just in general?
No, like what was her trauma, or did she not have one? If the whole idea is that Slayers were born from like traumatic situations.
Yeah, I think that just applies to the situation where then there were thousands of Slayers.
Yeah, that's just a retrofitting.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything. She seems part of the original hook, wasn't it, is that she was distinctly ordinary.
Yeah.
So her mother couldn't understand why she was being expelled from school for burning down a building. That's it. I think it was the school gym because there were vampires in it, which she obviously couldn't tell her mum.
Yeah. So, I think one thing that I want to mention before we get further in, although we're already about half an hour in, so what are you gonna do? But, that when I first mentioned to my partner, for example, that we were going to do this Buffy episode, he was a bit confused because he was like, oh, they don't really spend a lot of time talking about specifically religion. And I could have picked a couple of things. I was debating on picking the one that you were talking about where she first is telling Spike about being in supposedly heaven. I was debating on the body, which is the episode where her mom dies.
That's another top 5 episode.
Yeah, and I was debating on Hush. I decided not to do Hush because I was already delving into Hush. And I decided not to do the other one because I kind of wanted to talk about stuff that wasn't as overt, because I think we sometimes do that. We spend a lot of time talking about, say, you know, the representation of Islam or how to talk about religion in a very specific instance. I'm
going to use a term that you really hate, implicit religion.
I do dislike. I'm sorry, I just wrote Alan a huge chapter where I spent a lot of time complaining about that term.
It's a useful category for conveying.
It's a nice thing to think with. Do you want to explain implicit religion? Because I think it's something that we play around with on this pod, but I don't think we've ever... Well, we've probably directly talked about it, but not often.
So the idea of implicit religion is essentially what we're trying to do with this podcast, with this particular episode of Buffy, is we're talking about religion appearing, or rather, not necessarily appearing, in aspects of life that are not overtly explicit. So we're not talking about an episode of Buffy to do with a church, for example. We're talking about something that on the surface may appear to be completely non-religious, but when you begin to untangle it and unpack it, actually you see religion is at play here. Yeah.
I mean, we could argue over some aspects of that, but that would be a discussion about implicit religion, and that's not what we're doing today.
Yes. That's just a brief overview of what is generally meant by implicit religion.
So we've kind of talked about the thing with Buffy and the issues with Buffy in regards to her in this episode of struggling with depression, having been risen from the dead. We've all been there. I think one of the things that's really... Did that take you a second?
Teenager, you can... Yeah, I was just thinking about how teenagers could really relate to that story. Yeah. Who among us? But
there's a kind of primary theme in Buffy as the show throughout, I would say, probably every season to potentially every episode, which is themes around communication. And conversation and miscommunication. There are episodes where they mess up a spell because they don't word things exactly correctly. Or they're not talking about their issues when they should be talking about their issues.
Or they scan a demon into the internet.
Yeah. Or they're talking too much when they should be more pared down. And I think this is why the episode Hush is so stand out to a lot of people who watch Buffy, because the episode Hush is where the instead of the monster of the week making everyone sing and dance, the monster of the week removes everyone's ability to speak. It's the bulk of the episode, like 20 minutes of the episode to 25 minutes maybe, it's just silence. I mean, you get like the, the background noise of things happening, sound effects and stuff, but I don't even think they put very much music in those bits. It's mostly, I mean, they play music when you see the monsters, the gentlemen.
And if I recall correctly, it's decidedly Danny Elfman-esque.
Oh yes, it's very specifically creepy, and the gentlemen have a very like Slender Man-esque vibe to them. This was before Slender Man, so I should have phrased it differently. Slender Man was probably derived from the gentleman rather than the other way around, but I think it borrows from some elements. They do have faces, and they are particularly creepy faces.
They are, yes.
And of course, again, mental health issues. They're followed by little helpers that are in straitjackets. But basically, that episode was all silence. And so I think it's really interesting that this episode, once more with feeling, is essentially the entire opposite of Hush, where instead of facing ideas of communication and miscommunication by stripping communication, they solve or talk about issues of communication by giving them too much of it.
Yes. Yeah, it taps into the idea as well of musicals always being talking about one's feelings.
Yeah. And of course, like, musicals always have that thing to them where someone breaks into a whole song and dance, but then when it picks back up with the narrative, no one has heard what that person has just spouted, right? It's like a soliloquy, like an old school soliloquy, but set to music.
Yeah.
But, like, they don't pick up on it unless it's a duet or unless it's part of a direct conversation. Like, it's always sometimes hard to figure out which things the rest of the time.
Yeah, you get this very much with your classic Broadway musicals.
Yeah.
The time will almost pause. That someone will just burst into song. Like, they'll arrive somewhere. So, good example, in Wicked, when they arrive at the Emerald City, they'll they'll get to the entrance, and then they'll just sing about the fact they're at the Emerald City, and then go in.
Yeah.
Like, it just wasn't awkward at all.
But in Buffy, they play with that idea by making it so that everyone has heard your soliloquy.
Yeah, is hyper aware of it.
They're very aware of it. They're listening to it. They're hearing it, and they're reacting to it. Which I don't know how much I would want people to be hearing my soliloquies, because I definitely talk to myself a lot when I'm by myself, so I could imagine the kind of song and dance I would burst into that my husband would be like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, that's the thing. The conversations that we have with ourselves in our minds, you know, things that we don't necessarily want to share for a variety of reasons, not necessarily in a nefarious way, just this is just how I'm processing things, and this is how I feel about things. That's something that's something that would give me some anxiety, because I am quite a private person. I have to get to know somebody pretty well before I open up, so the thought of bursting into song, even though I would I'd own those songs.
Yeah,
I'd be great, but I would certainly not be comfortable with that idea. So it's an interesting premise, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's not abnormal, I think, in pop culture to kind of play with this idea of the inner thoughts becoming outer thoughts. I've been watching The Sandman very slowly. And there's a whole episode, which is actually a really fascinating episode to watch. We should probably maybe talk about it because I loved the episode. But there's an episode where one of the characters decides to strip everyone's lies in a diner. So it's a really cool setup where you start getting all the gossip from these just random people that are just living a normal life in this diner.
Yeah, and it gradually just becomes...
And it gradually gets crazier and crazier,
yes,
but he's stripping their way of lying, and that's all senses of it. So, the waitress who says, want some more coffee, handsome, and he's like, you don't think I'm handsome.
And then she starts to say, no, I don't think you're handsome. And she's clearly disturbed by the fact that she's... Yeah,
and at the end of the episode, obviously they're making a point of they're not lies necessarily. It's that, we have our own ideas of dreams and functions that may seem like lies on the outside, but actually this is just how we live by... I mean, they make it as a whole thing about dreaming because it's Sandman. But it's the conception of the way that we function in society and the way that we think about how communities are built, that you can't have all of your inner thoughts be outer thoughts because it'll just collapse your social bubble.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you kind of have to have those insular thoughts. Not because, again, like you were saying, not because they're nefarious, it's just because you it's just crazy to have every single thing that you're thinking of known to everybody around you. It's just not important. So yeah, I found it, this kind of plays a similar idea to that Sandman episode where they kind of strip that back, so then suddenly all the inner voices are becoming outer voices, and now everyone has to deal with it.
Yeah. And they're always truths that will affect others. So it's never things like somebody doesn't turn around and say, oh, well, not a lot of you know this, but I like to sing in the shower. It's not mundane things like that. It's usually what's known as truth bombs.
Yeah.
So something that when it's revealed has an enormous consequence on those around you and your relationship with them.
Like if Alan decided that he just wanted to truth bomb and say that he really hates when I interrupt him when we're recording a podcast, and then it would...
I mean, I can't do that because I interrupt you all the time, so that's fine.
But it would be that thing that would cause essentially an unnecessary friction that, while we're both aware that this is something that is probably annoying, it being voiced is a really different situation.
Is this your roundabout way of saying, Alan, stop insulting me? I'm sorry if I do.
No, that's me apologizing for the way that I do that.
I haven't noticed it, so you're okay.
Okay, well that's good. But yeah, it's...
Ooh, hear that awkward silence there, everyone.
That's why I interrupt you, because I'm like, I start anticipating awkward silences, so I fill it, even though it's not silent yet.
Yeah, you don't want dead air on the radio, do you?
Even though I can edit it out, but we both know I'm not going to.
We both know you're not going to, yeah.
But yeah, so I it's an interesting kind of reflection on community and construction of community and construction of society and the way that we kind of have to structure ourselves. I can probably edit this out if you don't want to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
But I wrote down a note of determinism versus free will.
Yes.
And that's all I wrote.
Yeah, and that's all she wrote. Yeah. Yeah, very thorough. I know exactly what you want to talk about. So, how does determinism and free will play? I'm assuming you're referring to the fact that they are... that they don't have control over what they are confessing, and what they're confessing about is their attempt to control their lives. So, for example, Willow's using her free will to magically manipulate Tara, but then there's the determinism where they can't help the situation that they're in and everything's coming out in the open. Or have I completely misread your incredibly
No, I think a little bit of both. The second option is my option. No, I think this episode plays with, because I think the theme of determinism versus free will is another one that pops up often in Buffy. And this is another kind of clear example of it, of, like you pointed out, Willow is they had a huge argument, her and Tara, that seemed like they were probably going to break up over it. And so she exerts free will to control Tara to keep them from breaking up. But of course, doing that is going to make them break up.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing. And it's also the issue that Buffy is faced with all the time, of that her own free will versus the duty of the Slayer.
Yeah, there's so many moments in the show where she does not want to be the Slayer anymore. In fact, I think there's an episode where she says she quits.
Yeah.
and she just can't. That's just...
She just can't.
This is your role. You have to deal with it.
And, in some senses, part of the issue of Buffy's depression at, being alive is the fact that she has fully given over to the duty. So in the times that she's really struggling with, her post-resurrection, for lack of a better word, she's no longer fighting that fight of the free will versus determinism. She's fully, I'm just the Slayer and I'll do my duty until I'm done.
But it all gets more severe, doesn't it? Because in the early seasons, she wants to not be the Slayer so she can do things like go to a house party and not have to go on patrol for vampires and stuff. It's little things like that. And then gradually it gets to the point where, no, you can't even be dead. You have to come back and do overtime. You
can't even just have a peaceful afterlife. You've got to come back and keep doing this.
You've got to come back. So... Yeah,
but yeah, I find it interesting that through most of this episode, and I think that part of it's kind of captured in that beginning number that Buffy sings.
Yes.
Is that idea of I'm doing the duty. I've given in, I'm the Slayer, and I'm no longer fighting for my own free will. And somehow that is, like, not having the argument between determinism and free will is essentially, in a way, giving up. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative light of depression. I'm just trying to, using the
you even have
show's own
themes,
idea.
You even have these themes trickling into Giles' song. About how he's concerned that he's sheltered Buffy to the point where he's not letting her go off and make her own decisions.
Yeah.
And that feeling he has of, wanting to be like a father to her, but what does that mean? What does a father figure do for a daughter?
Yeah.
When do you let go? When it's time for them to fly the nest?
And he kind of makes a dumb decision by she's going off to fight the demon to save her sister, and he just says, we're not going to come and help you. Which I think is the stupidest decision. Yeah.
Because part of the theme of Buffy is that teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Yeah.
That it's the power of friendship. It would be a great anime.
Oh, it would be a fantastic anime. It'd be the best magical girl anime. She'd have to have a transformation every time she became the Slayer.
Of course. But it would... the power of friendship solves everything in Buffy. And I really like that moment where Buffy's like having a sing-off with the demon, even though the demon doesn't sing.
Yeah.
And Giles says to Tara and Anya, interestingly not Willow, for reasons that we've already discussed, go and back Buffy up. And back Buffy up means doing backing vocals for her song.
They're doing like a little dance behind her and doing backup vocals.
Harmonies. Obviously it doesn't sound like that, it sounds good. But that's a moment that always cracks me up.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a weird... I still don't quite understand the reasoning behind the decision at first. Because obviously very quickly they go, no, never mind, we're going to come and back up Buffy. But it's like, the damage is already done.
Yeah.
Let's take this girl who's depressed and say, you know what, now you have no friends.
Yeah, they do the whole rise and fall and rise thing, don't they? With the Scoobies a lot.
Yeah.
But at least you get Walk Through the Fire, which is just...
I was just about to sing it, and then I went, I'm not going to subject our listeners to that.
Walk Through the Fire is... You're a pretty good singer, aren't you? I mean, I've never heard you sing, but you've told me that Tom is impressed by your singing.
Well, but I have learned that Tom's family can basically not carry a tune, so I don't know if my ability to occasionally hit a note is just massively impressive.
Okay, fair enough. Well,
but I will not put it on podcast record. Maybe a different day when we're gaming together, I'll break out in song.
Unfortunately, Wales is known as the land of song, but I'm the exception that proves the rule. I'm not a singer. I can do some yell singing, so if I'm listening to more aggressive music like My Chem, for example, I can belt out I'm not okay.
I can do some cake songs.
But I definitely... you won't find me doing Celine Dion. Much to Celine Dion's relief. You can edit that out, that's a joke.
Yeah, because I'm sure she'll listen and have an opinion on it.
Oh, dear me. Sorry, what were we saying?
We were talking about determinism versus free will.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a core theme throughout Buffy, and I think it's something that is meant to relate to a teenage audience as well, who are feeling a little bit like, school sucks, life sucks, but I have to do all these things, and then you watch Buffy, and then like mundane, not always mundane, of course, but sometimes mundane issues can help you relate to a character and so on. Because this is the interesting thing. As I said, I didn't watch Buffy as a teenager, but my wife Toria, she did watch Buffy as a teenager, and she clearly found the show incredibly cathartic. Particularly season 6. because it's the most depressing season for a whole number of reasons, because I think it's also the season where Tara dies.
It is.
Oh yeah, of course it is, because that's why Dark Willow appears.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot happens in season 6. It's very heavy going. Which is why the musical episode, despite it still dealing with really heavy themes, is actually a little bit of a relief.
Yeah.
Because you get some fun, chirpy musical numbers. I think even because we haven't discussed Spike's song.
No, which I love that they gave him like a punk rock.
Yeah,
song,
definitely. And he sings a song basically about how he loves Buffy and how Buffy's constantly turning up in his life, and he hates the fact that he loves her because he's an edgy bad boy vampire.
Yeah.
But also part of the song is he wants to rest in peace, but he can't because he's a vampire. So, which is why it makes it perfect that he's the one to deliver the line to Buffy at the end that life isn't bliss, life is just this, it's living, because he has to do it too.
And I think he even says, so one of us will be living, which is also an interesting commentary.
Yes, because he's still dead, isn't he?
Because he's still technically dead, even though he's not dead, and that he's kind of trying to push her into this thing of like, at least you're alive, and you can kind of have that.
Like, is this before he gets his soul back?
Yeah, so I think this is the end of the episode for Once More with Feeling is when Buffy decides to actually go full force and basically date Spike. And so I think she dates him for a while before he gets his soul back. Because there's like weird him not having a soul things.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a particularly grim storyline that leads to him seeking his soul back.
Yeah.
Which I don't intend to get into now because I don't want it to get too heavy.
Yeah. So this is before that. But I do always love Spike. Because
Spike's wonderful. The problem he also has is because he has no soul, he has no compassion. It's not as clear cut as it is at the beginning. When Angel loses his soul and he just becomes utterly ruthless because he just doesn't have any human compassion. Spike's already blurring those lines before he even gets his soul back. Because he's essentially one of the Scoobies by that point.
Well, and Spike, even when he first appears, because of the fact that, like, they go into his backstory, but he was, like, the poet. He was like a really bad poet in like the 1700s or something. And so I think that even when he became a vampire, he was still that kind of weird, fluidy he just kind of went with the flow and didn't really like push against things sometimes. And so I think he was an interesting character even when he was the baddie.
Yeah.
And because he was a recurring baddie for a while, but even
when he first turns up, he's actually scary.
Oh, he's amazing.
He's a pro, because he becomes a little bit comic relief.
He was comic relief even when he first shows up.
Yeah,
because he had the girlfriend. It was him and his like vampire girlfriend, and he was obsessed with her, and she did not give a crap about him, and it was really funny.
Drusilla, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he has that great moment where he says, "Someone's in the ceiling." Remember that moment?
Yes.
Iconic.
James Marsters does all of the narration for all of the Dresden audiobooks. Yes. And there is a character that is supposed to have a crisp British accent, and that character is just Spike. Like, he sounds like Spike, he talks like Spike. That's James Marsters just plays him as Spike, and it is amazing because you'll just be listening to it, and he hasn't. James Marsters is American, so he doesn't have the British accent normally. But then it's like, oh, there's Spike.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty convincing one as well.
Yeah, apparently he was always doing it to mock Anthony Stewart Head, which is.
Okay.
That's what his accent is mocking other people.
There's also a wonderful episode, isn't there, where they think they're father and son because they're both British. Which is brilliant, given the dynamic that Giles and Spike has.
Well, we should probably stop reminiscing over Buffy episodes. I had a fun time. I love Buffy, and maybe we'll do another. Maybe once a year we'll do a Buffy episode.
I think as a complete change of pace, The Body would be an interesting episode to discuss.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I was going to talk about it in relation to conversations around religion and death and dying and grief. And I think that's the approach that we would take from it. But like you said, it's a bit. It's a really good episode for those discussions, but it can be a bit heavier than a fun musical episode.
I wanted to ask you on a similar note before we end. Have you seen Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog?
I have.
Because that's also by Joss Whedon, who I know is now a problematic figure.
I think he was always a problematic figure, but we just didn't hear all the stories.
Yeah. Let me rephrase it. It's now apparent to us that he has always been a problematic figure. But Dr. Horrible is of the same vein, essentially, as Once More We're Feeling. Very similar stylistically in terms of the songs that they do. And I just really enjoy Dr. Horrible, so I was just curious if you'd seen it.
I have seen it. I watched it when it was kind of newly on the internet scene. But yeah, I think speaking of Joss Whedon, there's been a lot of stuff that's come out over the years of specifically his treatment of Sarah Michelle Gellar, who plays Buffy.
Yes.
So I do want to acknowledge that I am aware of those stuff, and
I feel really bad. I can't remember the name of the actor who plays Cordelia.
Oh yeah.
But his treatment of her has also been under scrutiny.
Yeah, she's a big role in Angel.
Yes, that's right. Apparently it was in relation to their dynamic on the set of Angel.
Yeah, she's a really important character in Angel, and I love her in Angel. So we were looking up once what happened to her, and that was when I learned about a lot of stuff, and I was like, oh, that's sad. I didn't want to learn all that stuff, because she seems so amazing and like a really good actress. And
yeah, for sure. And I do need to watch Angel as well, so that I can get more Spike in my life, because Spike is an angel.
Spike is an angel. They as much as Angel's a big broody character, the whole show also makes fun of the fact that he's a broody character, which makes it less broody. It makes it a bit more silly at times when he's a bit broody. They have a Giles equivalent as well.
No, they don't. No one could ever be Giles.
Who's, a bespectacled Englishman who is a librarian, they
go that similar, do they?
Yeah, I think he's a Watcher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't remember. It's been a really long time now since I've seen Angel, but I can't remember when in our relationship we were watching Angel for me to have remembered this stuff, but... But it's really funny. What you should do is you should look up, and I suggest this to anybody who hasn't seen either Buffy or Angel, and I regret not doing this, but because they used to, at one point they were airing simultaneously.
Yes.
And so they would actually refer to episodes that had just aired. And so you can actually print out, it's on you can look on the internet. What am I doing? Why am I 80 all of a sudden? Where you can print out your map quest. No, you can get the list of which episodes to play in what order, so that way you start doing the interspersing. There was
a point in Buffy where it said previously on Angel.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you think, oh, okay, Buffy was in an episode of Angel all of a sudden, and
and something happened, and so, and there was because we just watched all of Buffy and then watched all of Angel, and I do regret it, because there were times where they would just say something like, oh yeah, because of what happened yesterday, and you're like, what happened yesterday?
Yeah. No, that's a good idea, because that sounds like quite a fun way of doing it.
But yeah, I think it would be a fun way of also rewatching bits of Buffy and recontextualizing and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure.
Highly suggest. Well, if people want to tell you about Angel and Buffy and their favorite episodes and how much Giles is amazing, where can they go?
If people want to tell me about Angel and Buffy and how Giles is amazing and their favorite episodes, they can come find me on Twitter at AlaJLL
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Vivian Asimos on both. And you can check out my blog, incidentalmythology.com. And you can also follow the show. We have a Twitter, not an Instagram. Maybe eventually on Instagram. I haven't decided what I would do with an Instagram. But we have a Twitter that I occasionally use, at RPC_pod.
Hit that follow button.
Yeah, and if you have any, like, commentaries that you want to send us or discussion points, obviously Twitter. We've gotten a couple of discussions on Twitter. And we also get emails at religionpopculturepod@gmail.com. I think that's all the plugging.
I think so. I think that's pretty comprehensive.
It was a very fast one, I think. I'm getting better at it. Well, thank you, as always, Atlid, for joining me. I always love chatting with you about all things religion, pop culture, but specifically Buffy.
And everything in between.
And everything in between, like Buffy.
Indeed. Exactly. Implicit religion.
It's
for
a
what
shame.
it's worth, I don't particularly use the term implicit religion in my work. I don't dislike it.
Maybe we'll eventually at some point do like a bonus episode where we actually like talk about important terms in the study of religion and discuss them in like real senses rather than just quick overviews, and we can get into discussions and arguments about it and stuff.
Sure, that sounds good.
So now that that's in the ether, we're gonna have to do it eventually.
We're gonna have to do it because we've made a promise to our loyal audience.
Well, thank you for being with me, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks everyone. Bye for now.
Bye!